Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the office. Today in Com 322, Argumentation, we are going to be talking about two chapters, Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. After reading Chapters 1 and 2, you should have a pretty broad introduction to how arguments work. And your book does a much better job of making that distinction between an argument that we think is a disagreement, that is a yelling, screaming fight sometimes, versus an argument that is a claim that you're putting forward that you hope people are persuaded by. In chapters 3 and chapters 4, we start to dig in a little bit deeper into how we communicate our arguments. And so these chapters are actually pretty darn important and somewhat central to the core of this class of what we're trying to learn this semester. So let's just get started because there's going to be a little bit for me to say here. So chapter 3 really sort of states some obvious things, I think, and so does chapter 4, but it's the stuff beyond the obvious things that I think are important, so I don't want you to miss them. Some of the obvious things are that arguments are used to change people's minds, to get them to act, to get them to do something. Arguments are about persuading. I don't know why that's, something they felt the need to read or to write, for us to read, but there it is. So yes, arguments are about influencing, about persuasion, about not necessarily influencing behavior, but also influencing beliefs, ideas. We're probably not going to change most people's values, their core values, but we can utilize their core values to help us make better arguments for them. So as we know, all persuasion, despite what most of the theories say, should be audience-centered. Now, Chaim Perlman is usually identified as the person who introduces the idea of audience centrism into argumentation studies. And we don't usually carry that over into persuasion, but sometimes you'll see hints of it here and there if you study persuasion theory. So what does it mean to be audience-centered? Well, that means that my goal is not as important. I am not as important. Nothing is as important to my success as understanding my audience. Now, you may be thinking, okay, I did audience analysis in Com 115. At least I hope you all are learning audience analysis in Com 115. This goes beyond that. This we talk about not just audience analysis, but audience assessment. Your book labels it that way very specifically because to do an analysis is a quick and easy thing to do, right? You look at age, you look at gender, you look at sex, you look at socioeconomic class, education levels, you look at the environment, etc. Not that hard to pull those out. It's when we make assumptions from those things that we really truly assess the audience. Like, for example, if I'm giving a speech to college students, for the most part, it's going to be 18 to 25-year-olds. It's going to be students who are probably, if I'm at Missouri State, most of you are working pretty hard and going to college at the same time. Some of you might be first generation. Some of you might be a non-traditional, as we used to call them, a student who is older, or if I'm giving a speech, let's say, for example, at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is, very, very close to an Ivy League school. If I'm there, most of those kids come from very, very rich families. Higher socioeconomic class than I'm ever going to be able to attain or that my parents were able to attain. Most of them will be on scholarship of some kind. Most of them don't have to work. However, all students are supposed to be focused on getting their degree for a reason. In other words, to not just appreciate the differences in audiences, but to look for the similarities as well. To all students, you hope that more than just the degree counts, that more than just grades count. You hope that you share a value of education, right? So we can make some assumptions about both audiences, both groups at both universities, but where they differ may change the way that we make argument. The references that and sort of the examples that I might use at Missouri State are very different than the examples I might use in Carnegie Mellon. Also, it's in the middle of a downtown, heavily populated area with 3 other major universities in the area. So, this is not the only option for students to go to a state institution, in this case, a private institution. This is not, a place where you can go to classes and the campus is pretty calm. There's always some like sort of craziness going on. It's right by the zoo. It's right by the museums. It's in the center of town. So of the city. Okay. And it's a medium-sized city. Maybe St. Louis size, right? So, but that's big enough to change people's attitudes when they are members of our audience. So that's the first thing I need to do, is to assess my audience. So I do an analysis. I assess what kinds of arguments would work for them, and I assess the kinds of arguments that I may want to avoid, and I choose those carefully when I'm writing my speech. So the book also makes the assumption that all audiences, or the assertion, I should say, that all audiences reason based on what we've experienced and from the stories that we're told. So if you'll recall at the beginning of the book, we talked about that difference between the rational world paradigm and the narrative paradigm. This book looks at the world through the narrative paradigm. So it's about stories and how those stories work. So if those stories make reasonable sense to us, if they have resonance, if they have some sort of fidelity, then we are more likely to believe that story. We're more likely to listen to that story as credible, and then therefore might find the argument within that story to be more credible as well. Most of us actually work this way, and we just don't realize it. So whenever we make an argument to people in the public sphere specifically, we usually include a narrative with it, or an example of some kind in narrative form. You'll notice I do it all the time. Now, you can see those stories, those narratives, as tangents, or we can see those stories as helpful to illuminating the argument that you're making. And when you're a teacher, hopefully most of the examples are illuminating. I don't think we always hit the mark, but hopefully most of the time. And when you're speaking to a large audience, you want to make sure that your narratives make sense within the context of your argument as well. So they should be relevant and they should be helpful to you making your argument. So Perlman, the way that your book describes Chaim Perlman and Lucy Albrecht's Titecta is to say that they introduce this idea of an audience-centric view of argumentation and persuasion. And that is correct. They also talk about the objective facts and obvious truths being the place where we might start with all audiences. But the objective truths, or the acceptable truths, or the ones that we've already accepted to be true and therefore they're obvious truths, those are actually specific to our different audiences as well, to the assessment that we've done of our audience. Now, what's interesting about this is that the book talks about these objective facts and obvious truths. I want to make sure I got the wording just right. Now, what's fascinating is those two things sound a lot like major and minor premises to me. So if you've studied Aristotle's original deductive argumentation structure of the syllogism, you have a major premise, which is a generally agreed upon truth, an an all-encompassing statement, generalization that everyone accepts to be true. All humans are mortal. Got it. The minor premise is things that are also obviously true. So it might be a scientifically specific proven truth, or again, one that we generally accept to be true. All humans are mortal. We generally accept that to be true. I would also argue there's a scientific way to prove that. But secondarily, Socrates is a human. Okay, that's our example, right? Socrates is a human. So therefore, Socrates is mortal. Okay, that is a ridiculous amount of work to go through to say that Socrates is mortal, right? I mean, we wouldn't go through all those steps. Aristotle really presents these as more of tests of truth than anything else, which these days we don't really use all that much, and there's not usually a reason to. However, What gets missed until we get to sort of the more detailed structure of an argument is the reasoning that comes out of that, which is to say that the obvious truths, the accepted objective facts, those things come together and produce an argument that may not be as obvious. The problem with a syllogism is that if you know the general principle is true, then you know that the conclusion is true. And you already know the conclusion, so not helpful. However, look at it just a different way. We pull from our experiences with these concepts and ideas that we argue from. So all humans are mortal. Socrates is mortal. Therefore, Socrates is going to die. Okay, like, did you see how I took that a little bit further? And there's something humorous about that, except that's how we think. We don't think, oh, well, he's mortal, and mortal people die. Therefore, Socrates is going to die. I mean, that's just another syllogism, right, on top of it. And we could really spend all day just sort of deconstructing those syllogisms throughout as far as we want to. But we don't need to. Why? Because objective facts and generally accepted to be true truths, well, those work as good bases in almost any audience. Now, there are some that are going to be specific to a field, and I'm going to talk about that here in a second. Well, no, I'm going to talk about it now, I think. So what are argument fields, and why does Stephen Toulmin introduce us to them? Well, one thing that you might have been thinking, and the same thing I was thinking, which is that if I'm going to give a speech to people in Springfield, Missouri, it's going to be very different from my speech to people in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's not going to be completely off topic, and I don't have to radically change my ideas and my thoughts or my proofs, but I might choose to tell different stories with my argument. So, for example, if I'm referencing something that I want the audience to understand about frustration in the world, talking about traffic here in Springfield is very different from talking about traffic in Pittsburgh. You've got completely different geographic areas, geological areas. In Pittsburgh, you get stuck on bridges and in tunnels. Here we have sort of wide open spaces. We have far fewer cars and a greater amount of space down here. Up there's a lot of cars trying to fit on a triangle. It can be really sort of frustrating, but so can driving around here. But if I'm going to talk about driving frustrations down here, I'm going to refer to things like people that don't obey traffic laws, slow pileups for like 5 to 10 minutes. I used to call it the Nixa Rush Minute. I'm not even sure we have a Nixa Rush Minute. And Springfield has like a Springfield Rush 15 minutes or half hour sometimes. Depends on the weather, I think. Up there, you're always going to be stuck on the Fort Pitt Tunnel and the Fort Pitt Bridge. Always. You're always going to be stuck in the Corliss tunnels. You're always going to be stuck on Roberto Clemente Bridge. There's going to be people walking on it, and that's annoying. Okay, so there are different factors that frustrate us when we drive in two different places. Does it change the fact that we're frustrated when we drive? No, but it does change the way that we might present that frustration so that your audience can identify more with your examples and with your story in order to be able to identify more with your argument. So let's say I'm giving a speech on road rage. I'm sure you saw that was where I was going. I have a lot of road rage. I internalize it though. So like in my car is what I mean. So I might be in my car cursing things out, like maybe waving my hands. I don't know, but I never go external with it. I never wind down my window and attack someone or flip them off or anything like that because it's too dangerous to do that. And that's true whether I'm here or in Pittsburgh. I just don't want to take that risk with human beings, okay? And also, it's just not nice, okay? It just slows down things. It doesn't actually help you get anywhere any faster. Me yelling at the top of my lungs doesn't get me anywhere faster. It just makes me feel better about me. So, I might address road rage as a real danger, even to people like myself who internalize that, because if you've got road rage, you got to be really careful when you're driving. So if you've got road rage, maybe you're not paying as much attention as you should be. Maybe you're moving your car too quickly or faster than you should be. You're flipping the wheel. You're trying to make turns where you can't make turns. All born out of that frustration. But the frustration that you understand and the frustration that people in Pittsburgh understand is the same. It just comes from different places. But we can bring our audiences to those places as long as we understand the field of our audience, the field that our audience is in. Now, I'm not really sure. I've never been a big fan of the term field of audience, mainly because Toulmin equates it to disciplines. And that's a very academic structure. And I'm sorry, but I don't like to live in academia. I realize that's my job. But most people don't live there because it's very frustrating to live there. So you got to live in the world. You know what I mean? But in academia, they talk about disciplines. I'm going to talk about it a little bit differently and tell you that fields may be a conglomerate of people that are very, very different, but share something in common. Your book talks about, a bunch of scientists together, or a bunch of teachers, or a bunch of students versus a bunch of homemakers versus, people with children or without children. I mean, okay, maybe. But that's not very helpful to me. I don't know about you, but breaking it down by what people do, what their discipline is, what their interests are, in that sense it's not helpful to me, because especially depending on the topic, if you're talking about a human interest, it doesn't really matter what your audience does. So what if you have 3 of everybody from every single discipline in front of you? What field is that? Well, honestly, it's a different field descriptor, right? Perhaps that it's people who are motivated to take action in their communities, for example. So here in Nixa, we have a lot going on, as you do up in Springfield, particularly with schools and book banning. Whenever we're in city council meetings or at school board meetings, everybody needs to take into account that everybody in that room does not already agree with your position. And you have to go from there. But when I'm having a meeting with a bunch of people for sort of our side of the argument, I already know we all agree on the basic principles that we agree upon. And I can argue from there. It's a lot easier, right? It's a lot easier to argue within our field of understanding and comfort than it is to argue outside of it. And that's where people say, everything is, it's uncivil. It's a lot of vitriol. It's a lot of flying rhetoric. Don't get me started on that one. But if people would just take a minute to think about the fact that your assumptions are not exactly the same as other people in the room, that you don't all agree upon the same value necessarily, or even the same beliefs. But there are certain objective truths and generally agreed upon truths that you should be able to reach. So all fields should understand that, for example, in our case, in the example I just gave you, we have the United States Constitution. It has the First Amendment. The First Amendment says there's freedom of speech and that the government shall not infringe upon it. Okay. Does the government infringe on your freedom of speech? All the time. Yes, they do. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater, as the argument used to be. You cannot put other people in danger. So your speech cannot instill in people a fear or a trigger of violence or an order to commit violence. That would be probably speech that would be curtailed by the government. Okay, so we know it's not like an absolute right to free speech. Within that, though, even though we all agree that we're under the United States Constitution, the Constitution's First Amendment protects our free speech, censorship impinges on free speech, even though we all agree to that point, it's beyond that point that we do not agree. All right, so we really have 2 fields of audiences coming together, but they're in the same sort of area of the field at the same time, because the objective truths and the objective facts and the agreed upon truths are things that exist no matter which side of the argument you're on. So the premises don't change a whole heck of a lot when you have even two fields that come together, if you will. And also within that, you're going to have parents, teachers, students, community members who are just interested, college professors who are interested, because we're all taxpayers who put money into our school system. You're going to have people who homeschool there telling you what the public schools should be doing, people who send their kids to private schools, so on and so forth. So it's not all, a homogenous group based on any particular category or descriptor. And they're not all there for the same side of the argument. So you have to find where we all agree first. That's essentially what working from the premises is saying, okay? Hopefully that makes sense to you. Now, they do actually, in the book, they actually do describe, understanding that groups are different based on their language, on their socioeconomic class, on their jobs, on their perhaps their style. They vary, and that sounds, again, a lot like a demographic analysis of your audience. That's why I'm saying you have to go beyond that to understand what your audience is expecting to hear, what your audience wants to hear, what your audience agrees with you on, and what they don't. Now, there are really two types of arguments according to Toulmin for fields, and this is always true, whether you call them fields or disciplines or categories or groups or whatever you want to call it. We'll stick with fields. You have field-dependent arguments and field-invariant arguments. Okay, what do we mean by that? Well, the field-dependent arguments means that your argument depends on who you're talking to, what field they're in. And so, as I said, when I'm talking to my people who I know agree with me already, my argument's very different than when I go into a city council meeting or a school board meeting and I'm talking to people who agree and disagree with me. I have to find that common ground first and help them identify with, patriotism or the Constitution or freedoms or rights or whatever, and then move from there. All right? Field invariant means that they don't change no matter what fields you're talking to. Some of these examples are going to be the most obvious truths, whether they're objective facts or agreed upon truths. For example, the most common one that people use as an example that is generally speaking field invariant is we should not harm others or we should not kill others. Other humans. I think most people will agree that that's the case. You want to find those invariant truths. They never vary, no matter who you're talking to. So no matter who you're addressing, these values are probably true. We're all Americans. We all follow the Constitution. We all believe in the First Amendment. You hope that those things are true when you go to have a talk about censorship or free speech, right? Because you need a place to start. And if people don't think that they live under the Constitution and that the First Amendment doesn't apply, then that's a whole other argument, right? You got to go backwards a little bit on that one to get to where you can get with your audience in order to make a good argument. All right. So those are the types of fields and the things that impact fields. And again, I want to emphasize that I'm skipping over the obvious things that you need to read, but focusing on those things that you might go, well, that's confusing. I'm not going to read that part because I already know this other thing. I mean, I know how that is. I was a student too, not too long ago. Okay, long ago, but I do remember how that worked. All right, so that's chapter 3. Let's move on to chapter 4. Now, chapter 4 says it's all about language. And yeah, it is. There's not a whole lot for me to say here because if you read the chapter, it's going to give you most of what you need. However, I'm going to sort of highlight a few things. They define language as a shared symbol system good enough. Words in this case are the symbols. Sounds and letters are the symbols. There are some visual symbols. And when we share the meaning of those, then we have a language that we can use, that we will understand each other. Now, here's an example of not understanding a language, a symbol, in the context of our community. Excuse me. I was driving down the road that I live on the other day, and my husband and I were in the car, and we're used to seeing Trump 2024 or an American flag, sometimes a Confederate flag, although that's a rarity, but you might see that. You might see the thin blue line flag. You might see the, although I'm seeing far less of these nowadays, POWMIA, veteran flags. Okay, all these different flags. But I saw one the other day that I had never experienced. And it turns out that these things didn't really become defined until about 1955. And despite how I look, I'm not that old. So I wasn't here for the original discussion. And apparently it's making a comeback. And that is the blacked out flag. And apparently the blacked out flag is supposed to somehow indicate no survivors in a war. In other words, we don't take captive. We kill. That is drawn from a history of pirates using black flags, I guess. I mean, there is this convoluted history behind the blacked out American flag that is really difficult to pull apart. What's more difficult is when somebody has that flag up, what do they mean by it? We had this discussion with the Confederate flags for a long time. Well, it's just me showing my, my spirit for the South. Or in my husband's case, they literally were called the South Side Rebels, and they literally had Johnny Rebel on their flag. And so in the back of it was basically the Confederate flag in sort of an abstract way. And he's from Arkansas, where, basically you take the Confederate flag, you sort of flip it out into a diamond shape, and you have the state flag. So it made sense. Now, just less than a decade ago, in fact, probably about 5 years ago, maybe, they got rid of that symbol from his high school. They've changed their names. I don't remember what it's called now, but they got rid of it. So my husband always had a Confederate flag. That was something and me being a Yankee, a little offended by it. But what I told him we could do, since they were passed down from his family or in his family, I said, here's what we can do. Fold them up and keep them in the closet. You could keep them just in the closet. That's all I ask. If you need to pull them out to show to somebody, or we want to keep them for family story time, that's fine. But I don't want them to be seen. And to his credit, he has always done that for me. They've always been in our closet, and he doesn't pull them out. So that's great. And I know what it means to him. And I know it doesn't mean racism or kill all the Yanks or anything like that. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that to somebody else, right? So the Confederate flag has had a lot of what we like to call loaded meaning that there's a lot behind it, but we may not understand what that is. The blacked out American flag seems to be sort of in the same space, not meaning the same thing as the Confederate flag at all. Nothing like that. I'm not saying that. But it's in the same space of having multiple meanings to different people. Some people say that it's just to protest how they feel about the country, that they're not feeling good about the country, which in that case, I might fly that flag if that's what it meant. And if that's what it means, I would be more than willing to share that. But unfortunately, the broader stroke of meaning seems to be something from sort of a take no prisoners. I think they were saying it stands for no quarter given, meaning that we will not keep anybody alive in our houses, on our ship, on our land. We will kill the enemy. Not sure how I feel about that message, but There is a neighbor right down the street. I don't know them, but they're flying that flag right next to a full color American flag. And so I have to say to myself, hey, we agree on something. I would be more than willing to fly an American flag. I do. I mean, often I fly a Pittsburgh Steelers flag, but I'd be more than willing to fly an American flag every now and then as well, and I do. It's just I love my Steelers, and I can't put them above America. That would be wrong. So it's either the Steelers flag or the American flag, right? One or the other for me. That's out on my house. So do I call these people up or go to their house and knock on the door and say, hey, what do you mean by that black flag? Well, let's think about that for a second. If I did that, how do you think they would feel? So if I take an audience-centered approach, I'm walking up to this house and I'm saying, hey, what the heck does that mean? I don't think they're going to say, hey, look at this friendly neighbor coming to find out what this is all about. They're more going to say, you're judging me. And I might take it that way too, to be honest with you. I don't think that's out of the realm of normal human experience to be defensive when people ask us why we have something the way that we do. Now, in that sort of experience, that sort of interpersonal communication experience, I definitely would not suggest that we all have the same shared values, and I know that because I don't. But in a broader audience, I might, in which case I could discuss, hey, what does that mean to you guys? What does the blacked out flag mean? It's a symbol. However, shared meaning is not really established just yet. Kind of like a Confederate flag, honestly. Obviously my family up in the Northeast are like, you would never get me to touch a Confederate flag. Well, okay. But does that mean that everyone who has one or even that flies one is inherently bad? No, of course not. But if you go up to the Northeast, they all share that symbol as a symbol of hate or bigotry or rising up against our government, something along those lines. They all think that. There's no debating that. Here we have a different attitude towards it. And so we might be more open to listen to what somebody has to say about it and what it means to them or so on. Maybe not, but hopefully we do, because we're in a different field of argument here. We're in a different audience here than we are out there. So a symbol system that is shared, meaning that you understand the meaning of that symbol system, whether that is visual or linguistic. Language, they also claim, is epistemic, and they're right. Epistemology is the study of how we learn, essentially. So sometimes I'll be talking to my colleagues and I'll say, well, the epistemological underpinnings of that or something along those lines. Other people will say andragogical or pedagogical, meaning the way that we teach. But language that they say the language is epistemic. So that means it shapes and changes and influences how and what we learn. And that's absolutely pretty obvious, but we don't think about it very much. So the word Yankee in my world means something very, very different than when I moved into my husband's world. And same thing with the Confederate flag and some other words that I don't understand, like black-eyed peas. I don't know what that is. As far as I'm concerned, it's a musical band, Obviously, he has made me try them in the last 8 years, and yeah, I'm not a fan, but I did try them. Or grits. Where we come from, grit means, you've had life experience and you know what you're talking about. You've got that little bit of toughness that you need to survive in the world. Down here, it means like a grain, right? And literally, these sorts of I'm not going to say colloquialisms, but I am going to say language symbol, the symbol systems that are shared can in fact impact how credible a speaker is and how much they're going to be believed and how likely it is that your argument is going to work. If you don't know, I think you do know probably where I'm going with this, which is let's take one of the most obvious experiences right now in the political world. Now, you may have heard about this, you may not have. It depends on how much attention you pay to late night talk shows and to the politics of a different state. But in Pennsylvania, which obviously I follow very closely, as you can tell, in Pennsylvania, there's a Senate race, and that Senate race is between a guy named John Fetterman, who is from the Pittsburgh area, and a guy named Mehmet Oz, Dr. Oz from Oprah, and from his own TV fame and selling miracle pill drugs. That guy. All right, so if you haven't seen this yet, you can look it up. It's kind of funny. Dr. Oz did an ad for Pennsylvania, which, by the way, he lived in New Jersey. He has like 8 or 10 houses. 3 of them are in Turkey. I mean, just he's rich beyond rich. And so people say he's out of touch with your average Pennsylvanian. I mean, we don't know what that world is like. And that may or may not be true, but he just decided to prove it true. He recorded an ad, and I can't believe his people let this go out, but he recorded an ad where he said the wrong name of the grocery store that he was in, which can be offensive sometimes to people, because what he did was he took one grocery store and another grocery store and put their names together. And so it's kind of like, what is he doing? Like, he doesn't even know where he is, right? This guy, the biggest criticism of him is that he doesn't know Pennsylvania and he doesn't live in Pennsylvania. And then you go and say the wrong grocery store name. Okay, that's all right. I might let that slide, except that he starts talking about the cost of groceries and how it's Joe Biden's fault, the Democrats' fault. So you don't want to vote for John Fetterman because he's a Democrat. And he says, let's take for tonight. My wife wants crudité for dinner. So I'm picking up these vegetables. And I really didn't think anything of it because I've known people who use the name crudité all the time. But it's not the common language symbol agreed upon that we use in Pennsylvania. So in Fetterman's style, with his tattoos and his hoodie on, he went on TV and said, and Twitter and hit all the social media saying, hey, Dr. Oz, in Pennsylvania, we call that a veggie tray, which is true. I mean, if you want to demonstrate how out of touch you are with a certain audience, use the wrong language symbols. It's that easy. Now, my sister tells me that everybody in New Jersey says crudité. We've got a ton of relatives in New Jersey. I was raised during the summer times on the Jersey Shore, essentially, and I don't remember them saying crudité, but they may have. I mean, I'm the only kid out of our family who kept moving different places, south and west and then north. And, I've lived like in 7 different states, whereas my siblings have lived in like 1. And so I know I picked it up somewhere, but I didn't think it was in New Jersey with my sort of blue collar family, but it may have been. And she said, yeah, they used to say it sort of as a joke, like, oh, we better get the crudité together. It's sort of a being fancy or being beyond my class or whatever you want to call it. So maybe they say that in New Jersey. Okay, that's a good argument for why Dr. Oz would say that, because he lives in New Jersey. But that goes to prove John Fetterman's point. His argument is that Dr. Oz does not understand Pennsylvanians because he doesn't live in Pennsylvania, he doesn't know Pennsylvanians, and he doesn't even understand how we talk about our groceries. So that is showing how Dr. Oz is using a field of argument that is incorrect. All right. So that's kind of an interesting thing that's happening right now, because every time Dr. Oz makes a mistake like that, he's basically reinforcing the narrative that's being told by John Fetterman's campaign, and therefore reinforcing the argument that Dr. Oz doesn't understand you. Whether you're Republican or Democrat, it does not matter. This guy is so out of touch, he doesn't even understand Pennsylvanians. All right. Which, when you're running for for U.S. Senate, that's a really good argument. Okay. I'm not saying that Fetterman's going to win. I'm just saying that that's a good argument. So you can see how language works in creating and maintaining an argument, particularly the credibility of your stories, of your narratives that feed your argument. So there are basically, according to your book, two kinds of language, abstract and concrete. Yes, we should have learned that in 115, so I don't think I need to go through that. But then in going along with this idea that we're looking at this from the narrative perspective, we have to understand that narratives are not always 100% straightforward, like crudité and veggie tray, okay? Not always the same and not that clear. So instead, we rely on comparisons. There's examples and then there's comparisons, right? And those comparisons are called metaphors. And they generally have two parts. There's the vehicle and the tenor, T-E-N-O-R. And this is not in your book, so this is supplemental, all right? The vehicle is the way that you get to understanding through your metaphor. And the tenor is the subject matter that you're using to help your audience understand. Some examples. My love is a rose. Okay. What is the vehicle? What is the tenor? The vehicle is the rose. The tenor is love. You're trying to help somebody understand what love is like by comparing it to a rose, by making someone say, okay, it's like a rose. The hell does that mean? I have no idea. Metaphors can be long and intricate as well. For example, there is a lovely poem by Robert Frost. It's in The Outsiders, the movie, if you ever saw that. And it's called Nothing Gold Can Stay. And it's essentially, I believe, 12 lines of, talking about nature and how quickly the sun sets and things like that. And how sad it is to watch gold fade away. And really what it is a metaphor for life. That you are only here for a short period of time and we glow like gold and we sparkle and then we have to go away and the world's a darker place because of it. So, metaphors can be as intricate or as simple as we want them to be, but they always have those two parts. The vehicle, our way of getting to understanding, and the tenor, the subject matter that we're using to help us understand. And so when you put metaphors into our stories, into our narratives, in order to make an argument, that seems complex, but it's actually something we all do. I'm going to make an argument that life is short and we should enjoy it. And I'm going to tell you a story about a leaf, and that leaf, it comes out and it's spring and it's green and it's young and it's supple and it's beautiful and it's able to produce seeds. And then when the fall comes, that leaf makes one sort of final spark of multiple colors and brilliance and radiances. And then it dies and it goes away and the world is gray and dark. So I just told you a little bit of a narrative that is a metaphor for life being so short in order to prove my point. So I've told you a story, it's a metaphor, and it makes an argument all at the same time. This is a really long, drawn-out way to say that poetry, art, the aesthetic can make an argument just as much as anything else can. That's why a lot of times when I listen to music, people hate watching movies and listening to music with me because I'll sit there going, okay, what's the argument that's being made here? I can't just enjoy anything. I have to know what it's trying to tell me. Okay, I'm very particular about that, which is why my husband asked me to listen to classical music a lot more often than anything else. Okay, but there are two functions of metaphors in these stories that we tell. One is ornamental, and the other is argumentative, basically. Ornamental are metaphors that just make things sound better, perhaps provide a little bit of clarity. But argumentative is a metaphor that is helping someone understand the argument that you're making. I do this with my son all the time. He's going to be turning 21 in December. And he often says to me, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. And I'm always like, well, that's kind of just the same as, and then I tell him some story that has some moral to it, right? That is supposed to be the argument against what he wants to do or supporting what he wants to do. That's just a way of talking. And understanding that that's a way of talking means that whenever you listen to someone tell a story, they're not just telling you a story. They're actually making a claim and an argument. And if you believe the story, if you believe the metaphor, and you find those things credible, then you're more likely to find their argument credible. All right, so that is chapters 3 and 4. And I hope it helps clarify a few things, although I think your book is pretty straightforward and I feel good about that. And at the end of your book, you're going to see that there are keywords and all that stuff that's supposed to help you so that when you come to take your exam in 2 weeks, you will understand it. And I say come to take your exam. I don't mean here in my house or at the university. It'll be online and you'll have a week to take it. Generally, mine are multiple choice or very short answer, like a couple of words. I'd never look for a short essay or a long essay. Please don't. And you take it online and you can take it anytime you want within that week. And you can take as long as you want to take that, but you only have one chance at it. So you can only make one attempt at it, but you can take as long as you want with it. So I hope that helps a little bit. And if you have any questions about the exams, let me know. This is week 3. Your exam is supposed to be in week 5. So we have all of next week. And then I will put your exam up probably Friday evening. And it will be open to you and available until the following Friday at 11:59 p.m. So you have a full 7 days to sit down and take the exam at your convenience. Most of my exams don't take longer than an hour. Definitely that would be at the outside range, I would think. But if you want to give yourself a lot more time, feel free to do that. Obviously, it's open book, open note, open lecture, open everything, because I'm not coming to your house to watch you take it. And so hopefully, you understand that the exams are supposed to just help me know that you are reading the book, which means that either you remember an answer or you quickly know where to find it, which is usually more important than anything else. Okay. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, or threats? Threats I'm not taking right now, but all the others, you can feel free to text me. You can feel free to email me. And if I don't respond, please text me or call me or put it up on the discussion board, which I will be going to right now to check out. And again, that's chapters 3 and 4. Next week, I believe, is chapter 5. And then we have our exam. All right, everybody, I'll be talking to you soon. I hope you have a really good weekend. It's almost here. Tomorrow's Friday. And I'll see you back here next week.